Well, this evening I have the honor, the privilege, and the pleasure of being joined by Mike and Melissa Brown, Gemtree Wines. Mike and Melissa, thank you so much for joining me. How are you on this wonderful evening?
Yep, we're great. Thank you. It's a little bit chilly here in the midst of winter in McLaren Vale, but we have a glass of wine in hand, so it's
and
all
the fire
good.
going.
Yeah.
That doesn't get any better than that. Look, I kind of feel like the audience are coming in after we're just wrapping up the party. I had such a terrific conversation with you before we actually went live. So much we talked about. Feel like we've just got to share a little bit of it now to make this worth it for the listeners. So to start with, actually wanted to start by saying a lot of the interviews that I've done recently have been targeted and special because they mean something to me in relation to, I guess, my personal wine journey. This one with you, no exception, because as I mentioned to you, my late father, kind of the catalyst for me launching this project, he did his last vintage with you guys and just didn't have enough great things to say. It's like a kid in a candy store when he came back, was just talking about it. Loved you guys, loved the team, loved the experience. So here's to Gemtree Wines.
Oh,
And
here's to your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amen. Amen to that. Now, you guys, unbeknownst to me, you were recently in Brisbane. I think that'd be a really interesting place to start this conversation. You were in Brisbane for the organic conference. Tell me more. Why were you in Brisbane? What was that?
Yeah, so we were in Brisbane for the Australian Organic Conference, which was themed Embracing Change and Transformation. So our vineyards are certified organic and biodynamic, and we are certified with Australian Organic. And so the conference was a 2-day conference with people from all areas of, could be farming or businesses that are certified organic. And it was a coming together to share information, to learn, to network. And it was just fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah. It's great to be in a room of like-minded people, Thomas.
Okay. Is it well attended? Big conference?
It was good. Yeah. So Thomas, just to add a little bit to that. So I don't think there's any conflict of interest here, but I'm on the board of Australian Organic Limited. So we wanted to host in celebration of 30 years, 35 years of Australian Organic Limited and 30 years essentially of the national standard in organic certification. And we wanted to be able to bring like-minded people together from, as Melissa said, all forms of agriculture, around agriculture, but not just to be talking to people who are certified, to be challenging essentially this area, to be talking about regenerative, to be talking about sustainable, to be looking to the future to say, this is where we sit today, this is where we've come from, but more importantly, where do we need to go? What do we need to do essentially as an industry to continue to capture the attention of the consumer, the trade, people that essentially have perhaps started their journey with organic, are looking to commence their journey with organic. You know, what does organic mean?
Yeah.
And I think I'm certainly very proud to be part of a really progressive organisation that we are not certified. So ACO is a certification body, right? But there was a demerger that occurred within that industry, within that business, 2.5-3 years ago. And so as the peak body in the country at the moment, Australian Organic Limited and the Bud logo is something that we truly believe in. But you can't be talking to yourself about this. We have to be looking at, okay, where is the market? What are the market looking for? Where's our competition? Where do we go from there? So we brought 140 to 200 delegates together. We had sessions that went from microbiology in soil through to Mike Benny hosting sustainable packaging. We had the new Minister for Agriculture there. We had key scientists on climate change. It was about where do we sit as a community, as an industry, as a body. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What do we need to be bringing for the future? Because this is where we sit today.
Okay, because I've got to say, keywords like biodynamic, organic, those are things that I don't know near as much about as I would like. So that's your job tonight, to educate me and the listeners. So we'll have a quiz at the end of it. You're pointing at Melissa. Terrific. But I mean, in terms of, I guess, the comment you were making in terms of really driving those movements forward, I don't think anybody has done near as terrific a job as Gemtree being a brand ambassador for that. Because really, I don't know if it's just me, you say biodynamic, and I think Gemtree. Maybe it's the stories I've heard. Being in a bottle shop, I see your products, and that's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's that you guys really represent the move in that direction. But I guess on that point, let's talk about the keywords. So we'll get into your story because I'm really keen to hear that. But let's just carry on this theme. What is it to be biodynamic and organic? Can we unpack both those terms?
Sure. Okay. So I was asked exactly that question on a panel at the conference. And I think organic, so both of them are focused on soil health, and both of them are natural methods of farming. So organic is about the removal of herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. And that biodynamic is that, but there's more to biodynamics. So biodynamics, there is an element of what you can't see in it, and is a belief that the lunar cycle has a role to play in what's happening here on Earth. So just as the moon has a gravitational effect on the tides, it also has a gravitational effect on nature, which has a role to play in what's happening here. So it affects nature and even us. There are certain things that and in particular, certain preparations that we apply to the land at different times to get maximum benefit. But also biodynamics is that really holistic approach, which it views farms and gardens as a living organism where plants and animals coexist in a healthy ecosystem. And I just think that is such a fantastic way to be viewing farming and just life in general, really.
Okay, it sounds quite potentially complicated, and just a couple of questions I want to ask, I guess, to get a little bit more context. So, if you're around a dinner table chatting and people throw a term like biodynamic out there, it draws all different sorts of reactions. Some people are very much for it. Some people go, oh, that's very avant-garde, very crazy. Is it scientific, or is it kind of philosophical beyond that, metaphysical?
Probably more philosophical. So there's an anthroposophical side to biodynamics that, look, to be honest, I struggle a little bit with. I'm more a realist. I think it's because I'm an earth sign. I'm a Capricorn. And for me, there's a very realistic side to life. And so what drew me to biodynamics was this focus on soil health, because I view myself as a farmer, and I believe I'm going to get the most, the best result from farming more naturally. Because if you work with nature, you are going to get a better result than if you work against nature. To me, that's just common sense. So I totally resonate with that side of biodynamics, which is all about building up your soil health, your soil fertility, and building up all that microbial life in your soil. And there are so many benefits to that. The anthroposophical side of it is the stuff where like we mix up our preparations in a flow form before we apply them to the land. And that's all about energizing the preparation that you're about to put out.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that side of it where you can't see about this connection with the lunar cycle. And I mean, we don't really know, what's happening out there in the planets that are so far away, but it's that belief that there is an influence here on Earth. And to me, that does seem quite reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so some of the practices that people talk about, so you've mentioned the lunar cycle, doing things in accordance with that, planting I think the most famous one to my mind is it planting horns full of manure or something like that. Unpack that one for me.
Okay, so that's the preparation 500.
Yeah. Okay.
That is where you take fresh cow manure and you pack it into a cow horn. And then you bury that under the ground prior to the winter solstice. And 5 or 6 months later, you dig it up. So what goes in as this sloppy, smelly manure comes out as a friable, sweet-smelling substance, which it's gone through a composting process. It's changed. And then when you mix that up in your flow form and you spray that out on the land, it stimulates all the microbes in your soil to start feeding. And that is what creates humus and more organic matter, which is what gives your soil really good structure.
Okay. So I guess what I'm gathering is could you put it down to like being insanely attentive to land cultivation?
It's about being really attentive to what's going on around you.
Yeah.
You would ideally, we try and spray our 500 when the moon is in a descending phase, because there is this belief that when the moon is descending, that forces are being drawn into the earth.
Yeah.
And then when the moon is ascending, we spray our 501, which is more what's happening above the ground. So these are the things that are that slightly more spiritual approach to biodynamics, but I think that it still makes sense.
Thomas, can I just sort of chop in here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So any agronomist, I listened basically last week to experts in their field about soil health, right? Any expert, PhD, doctor, professor, graduate, agronomist is going to talk to you about soil health, right? Getting your soil into the best possible condition, the healthiest condition without artificial stimulants, right, will give you longevity, will give you great nutrient reserve essentially for your plant to produce whatever it is you're trying to do. So I think this is the wonderful thing that we talk about biodynamics, right? So yes, that's a thing completely, but you come across into regenerative and you talk about what that group of or that movement is talking about. They're talking about soil health. This is not different. This is just a great form of the same. We're talking the same thing, but biodynamics is a definition. So I think, when people talk about regenerative, that's awesome. I love it, right? But we do it in a way that I think it really has a form about it and a shape and something that I think there is a connection that we have seen since the 1920s that, and Steiner has proved this, and this is where this all started, is that if you understand the rhythms that you want to farm in, where you're going to finish up with is not necessarily a perfect product, but a product that is really it really tastes like the place where it comes from. And when we talk about the industry that we're in, which is wine, and there's a word called terroir, right? That's exactly what we're trying to do every year. That's the goal. That's the nugget. So I sort of think that it's fantastic that regenerative is now a term, because it's making biodynamic even more relevant. So we're not competing, but this is a great way to say, right, well, how are we rejuvenating the land essentially where we started? We're actually putting a definition to this thing in an art form and saying, yes, there's a thing, and it's called biodynamic farming. So these are really well connected. They're certainly not in competition.
Okay. All right. And, taking all that into account, it's a movement that seems to be kind of just sweeping through the wine industry, and there's no shortage of organizations that are getting in line to, I guess, have that certification or that label. And we'll discuss that further later in the interview. But once again, it's a podcast about stories. So keen to hear your story, Mike, your respective stories, Mike and Melissa. You were farmers. So let's go back to the very beginning. We'll do this in turns. I'm going to throw this one. Ladies first. Melissa, where were you born? Where are you from? There's a little bit of a wine lineage, wine pedigree on your side. Want to hear?
So I'm from Adelaide. I was born in Adelaide, but my grandparents, my grandfather was he was a market gardener, and he came from Marion, and
which is where?
So it's a suburb of Adelaide, and he had a market garden in Marion. And then in the 1960s, with increasing urbanisation, he moved to this area, to McLaren Vale, and planted a vineyard in 1969, which just happens to be the year that I was born. So I think there's something in that. And then my parents, they actually had a wine shop at Ranella, and they had that for about 10 years, and then sold that and moved to this region and bought a vineyard. And my grandfather helped my parents when they first came here to set up that vineyard. He gave them the money to sink a bore. And so I sort of then grew up on that vineyard. That was a 30-acre vineyard in McLaren Vale. Mum and Dad were not particularly wealthy. It was a lot of hard work. I actually hated the vineyard when I was growing up. I thought it was dead boring. The last thing I wanted to do was go out and work in the vineyard. My grandfather, he paid me 20 cents a bucket to pick grapes, and but here I am. I've ended up making it my life's purpose in a way. Yeah.
Okay. And what I always find really interesting is when you hear people making a decision to buy a vineyard. I've become over the top passionate about wine as I've grown up. And that's probably because there is something sentimental that's sort of rooted there that's driving me in that direction. But when, buying a vineyard, that's an undertaking. So did you know much about what went into that decision to sort of leave an urban background and go out and do something like buying a vineyard?
Not at all. Took me a while to grow up, to be honest. And I think so when I left school, I did all sorts of jobs, worked in pubs, I worked in hospitality, and then I did a business degree, and I worked as a secretary, and I ended up working as an office manager in the education department. And then at the age of 25, I went overseas as a backpacker I went away for 9 months and travelled the world. I came back and I just thought, I can't go back to that office job. It's just too boring, and it's just not what I need to be doing. And I had no money. I had to move back in with Mum and Dad, and I said to Dad, can I come and work for you in the vineyard? And by this stage, he owned a few hundred acres, and he said, yep. He said, sure, you can come and work for me, but you won't last 2 weeks because you're too soft, and you won't be able to hack it. So that was like, waving a red rag to a bull. But what I didn't, it was all about timing. And what I didn't realize is that I needed to be in nature. And once I got out there and started working in the vineyard and just being outdoors, I realized that how much that resonated with me and really made me connect with who I am and what I'm about and what my purpose is. And yeah, so literally 6 months later, I started studying a degree in viticulture, and yeah, it was just about timing. I was ready to go. And of course, probably part of that too was that 2 weeks after I started working in the vineyard, I met this guy. And he was an aspiring young winemaker, and that kind of encouraged me to stick with the wine industry.
Okay, so we've got two parallel stories here. They've just crossed over. Great opportunity to duck down the other one. Mike, how did it all start for you?
Yeah, very, very sort of different sort of lanes that we sort of travelled in, but ended up in the same one, or very similar ones. We don't sort of operate in each other's lanes. That would be dangerous, Thomas. We both have our own lanes. Melissa loves crossing into mine, but I rarely cross into hers for good reason. So my folks started in agriculture, but not in wine. Had a great affinity, essentially, with the places that they worked in parts of Victoria, South Australia, then into New South Wales. Always had wine around them, but it wasn't, they were agricultural people, so farmers. And they left the farm essentially when I was in the latter part of my schooling. And we finished up in Sydney. They ended up in Avoca Beach in New South Wales. I was a boarder in Sydney. So I sort of ended up working in the city of Sydney. I started in the stock market in 1987, which was the worst year to ever enter the financial market. So that was very brief. And then basically was retrenched and looking for work, walked into a bottle shop, started working with alcohol, and thought, I think this is something. I had a really interesting, we'll call her a mentor, but I think, yeah, I'll give her that. She, I think, taught me very quickly about connecting a particular product to particular people. And so because we had moved around a lot as a young family, talking to people was something that I could do. My mother was involved in fashion, and she used to have sort of fashion displays. She had a label of her own. She worked for another business as well. So we always used to have sort of drinks, essentially, when she'd be showing her label. So, of course, I was the waiter, so I had to basically present the wines and all that sort of stuff. So that was a great introduction, essentially, I suppose, to hospitality. And looking back on that, I think that that's been a really important part of, I suppose, my progression as a person, is that no matter where you go in the world, you have to find a way to work out what someone is going to find interesting about what you do when it's very competitive, right? So breaking that line of communication to say, look, I've got this product, or knock that door down and say, look, I'm one of, when you travel internationally and you sell wine globally, in Australia, we're one of 3,200 brands. Internationally, we're one of 30 million.
Yeah.
So I got off track there a bit. Started working in bottle shops, then went to Roseworthy College and did the diploma in wine marketing, then started repping, worked in the Hunter, didn't particularly find my feet there, worked for some good businesses though, came down to McLaren Vale in 1994 to do a vintage Warren Randall, which was a fantastic experience. And that's the year that I met Melissa. And what I found essentially with McLaren Vale in 1994 was that it was a great little community, and it reminded me a lot of the little country towns essentially that I'd grown up in. So it was sort of almost a homecoming in a really different way, essentially, to Melissa doing what she'd done, travelled, then come back. I think I sort of found a spot that a little community that I could very quickly get on with agricultural people, that they weren't nearly as fast-paced as where I'd been in terms of Sydney, not nearly as pretentious, and that's no criticism, right? But that's where I was sort of sitting on that front. And then I met Melissa and found out that her father owns 300 acres of viticulture, and it's like, whoa, never made any wine before. Thought, here's an opportunity. Off we go.
Okay, 2 questions. The first one I'm going to direct at both of you, and then the second one I'll also direct the second one at both of you. The McLaren Vale. Give me a snapshot. So I've been lucky enough to get a number of McLaren Vale wineries. Darrenberg, Shottersbrook, Coriol, yourselves. The McLaren Vale wine scene, the community, what's it like?
It is collaborative. It is progressive. It is very community minded. It's just a great community to be in. So my parents, they have an amazing group of friends that, all of their mates were kind of started out with not very much and worked their way up. And then we've been part of this sort of next generation who have come in behind and are perhaps bringing in new ideas and are more concerned about environmental initiatives. And there's a whole group of us. So it's like the people that I'm now, my peers, their parents are the peers of my parents. So there's this great generational thing, and we're not afraid to share ideas and to help each other out, even though there is some competitiveness between brands. Ultimately, we're all in this for the same reason, and we know that it's all about promoting McLaren Vale and how amazing this region is what is going to benefit us all, and so that's why we're so collaborative. That's what I love about it.
Okay, what an answer. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think the couple of things, collaborative is a really big thing, and progressive. I think you've seen in a generation a lot of growers who have transitioned into makers. Right now, why did they do that? First of all, that as a grower, your route to market is very limited. You sell at the farm gate. So you're completely restricted by the opinion of a person who walks into your vineyard at a particular time of the year and says your fruit is this quality. And do you accept this price? Yeah. Given you've got a contract, given you've got all these sort of things. And I saw this essentially from, Melissa's dad's business of, wow, this was the thing that really concerned, I think, the family for the future was, we don't get to actually control where we're going essentially for the future. So that's one of the stories. So the Buttery story, the Paxton story, the Lease story, the Bosworth story, you look at the Harvey story, these are iconic families within this region. So all of those families I've just talked about now have brands. Right. And all of them made this decision with their kids' consent or without their kids' consent, because we could see that the farm gate wasn't an option for the future. So we had to diversify essentially the business. So collaborative, progressive, community, absolutely key, incredibly determined, stubborn, right? But willing. What is interesting, if you look at that movement I just talked about that group of people, about one of the words we've mentioned about sustainability, you look at the forefront of McLaren Vale right now, and those brands that I talked about, Bosworth, Paxton, Leask, which is hither and yon, Gemtree, they're at the forefront of sustainability of this region, right? And they've driven that change because they've seen that, okay, here's a foundation. The foundation is fantastic, but we can actually build on that, not change it. You don't want to need to change your concrete, essentially, the way that you built the house. But there's some internal furnishings that you can move, right, which will actually really create a new direction for yourself.
Okay. So much I want to unpack there, but I've got to ask my second question before I lose it. How did you two meet?
So
At a strip club. No, we didn't.
I was working in the vineyard, and there was I was working with a ground crew. One of the girls I worked with, she said to me, I know this guy. I think you'd get on really well with him. I need, I'll take you to meet him. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in hooking up with any blokes at this point in time. Anyway, she dragged one day, I think it was raining or something, and she said, come on, let's go and meet Mike. So he'd come down here with a girl from Sydney who departed. So Mike was working at a cellar door, and Wendy and I walked in there one day, and I looked at him, and he was serving customers at the time, and I thought, okay, yeah, well, this is interesting. And look at me blushing. Yeah. So, we ended up at the pub that night, and he dropped me home, and we've been together ever since.
How good is that? Okay. Now, the Gemtree story. Where did that start? Where did that come from? And how did it turn into the force that it is today? Tell me that story.
You want me to start that?
Yeah.
Share it around. Go, Mike.
Well, it started very firmly with Melissa's dad. So he basically, as Melissa said earlier, that he had a bottle shop, and then Melissa's grandparents were here in McLaren Vale, Ernest and Mavis Rivers. So Jill and Paul basically came down to McLaren Vale and bought their first vineyard. Paul, very, very dynamic business person, hungry, determined, very professional, profession in very, very astute real estate business person. Had a very unique eye, essentially, for I think the buy and the sell and negotiation. So they bought their first vineyard on Tatachilla Road, which is still in the family. The second opportunity came up when he was consulting, essentially. So he started a vineyard management business. Now, this is just to bring this into context, that here's a guy essentially that had no agricultural experience at all, right? Basically went into vineyards for the first time. So Jill had basically essentially very continuing on with her family side of things, had a produce basically garden that they were selling on the roadside. So strawberries and watermelons and, just like really scraping things together, right, to make ends meet. Paul started a vineyard contracting business, right, that ended up being a very big business. So with that contracting business, he was chasing, as the industry was growing through the 1980s, contracting. So everyone was planting. So Paul said, right, here's an opportunity, right? Get himself a tractor, get himself a group of people, putting in posts, planting vines, whatever. Taught himself essentially just through determination and seeing an opportunity. So he started setting up a vineyard here where we're basically sitting right now tonight, for a group of investors from the Hunter. And the remit was 100 acres basically of Chardonnay and Cabernet, to start this, we'll call it investment scheme, right? And what happened basically at the end of the 80s is that investment scheme ran out of money. So he went to the auction essentially with his brother, who was an accountant, and his brother said to him before he walked in the door, do not buy this vineyard. You haven't got any money. You can't afford it. You don't need this in your portfolio at the moment. No one else, well, there were a couple of other bidders there. So the names that I talked about before, right? They were all in the room, all thought this was an opportunity. Paul bought it. The fourth financial institution he went to and begged and said, can I have the money? They backed him. And that vineyard was called Gemtree. Why it was called Gemtree, I don't know. We've never, I think it was something, so the McGuigan family set this up originally. I think it was something to do with the native gum trees that still exist here today. And I think it was something to do with perhaps gems and trees, but I can't give you a definition that makes any sense. So that was the start of the Gemtree planting, right? And then what Paul did from there was he then slowly bought essentially the neighbouring properties around the McLaren Flat sub-region of where we sit today, of which now there's 220 acres, right? And that was all planted through a very aggressive period from 1989 through to 1998. 2001, right? And we went basically from Tattagee Road, which was 80 acres, to here at 220 to become 300.
But the Gemtree brand, so 4 years after Mike and I met, we were, because my family were just grape growers, and we were young, ambitious, naive, and we said, well, we can do this better than, Pernod Ricard or Orlando or Southcorp, Rosemount that we're buying our grapes. We're going to do our grapes better justice than they can. And so we decided to start our own brand in 1998. And Dad was dead against it. He was like, oh, you don't know how hard it is to sell wine. And he said, don't, because we needed his financial backing to get it up and running. So he said, well, don't make any more than 500 cases, because if you can't sell it, we're going to have to drink it.
Did you sell it?
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah, really quickly,
Okay.
yeah.
We did.
Let's talk about that, because I always find that particular topic of conversation one that's fascinating. How difficult was it? Like, that sounds, you talk to winemakers and they say that those early days are by far the hardest. Yeah, you're living in the red. You're looking over your shoulder at the bank, waiting for them to come knocking. How was that, and how long did it take for you guys? Was it all smooth sailing? Any difficult times there?
It was very difficult. It took a long time before the business could afford to pay Mike a salary. Yeah. But it was just slow steps, gradual increase of production. I think probably one of the big things for us was when we won the Hyatt Wine of the Year awards. What year was that?
2007, with 04 Obsidian.
Yeah.
I think the sort of the transition into brand, Thomas, was looking back, it was the most important, the first most important basically step that we took as a business. The second one was converting to biodynamic and organic biodynamic. But that the conversion into brand, although Mrs. Dad didn't support it at the time, had we not done that, I don't think essentially we would be in business today, given the cycles that we've been through and what I said before about selling at the farm gate. It's just, I think it's becoming a much more challenging environment. And although we don't necessarily need 300 more wine brands out in the market, if you've got a really good product and you've got people who believe in what you do, so you can gather a community somehow, then there is no doubt that is a much more sustainable proposition, right, than selling the grapes at the farm gate. You can have a diversified business, and I'm not suggesting for a second that everything we make has to come into brand. So I've contradicted myself a little bit there. So I think a mix of brand and fruit sale is important. But when you come into brand, what it's forced our business to do is actually make better wine. So we've had some of the most challenging discussions basically in a work environment, which has come also to home, is the quality has to improve. Because as a grower, we weren't good enough. So the wines we were making, and yes, I could say that that's partly my fault. Yes, I agree with that. But we had to push ourselves harder from a fruit quality perspective. So when you've got two people looking in opposite lanes, right, but focusing on the same outcome, you're completely challenged. And that has driven us as a business to not accept this is fine. And the two things that we focus on separately and together the most now is how do we improve? And not saying that we're not comfortable with where we're sitting, but when you get comfortable, you get lazy. So we're constantly looking at varieties we grow, continuous improvements in the vineyard. How do we make better wine? Who are the people that we're working with? Because that means that you're never going to sit there in the status quo and say, I'm happy with this. Yes, you have to accept the wins, right? But you also have to be able to say to yourself, where are we failing?
Okay.
Just one quick thing to add to that is that probably back in 98 when we started, we took probably 5% of Dad's production to make into wine, and today we're taking 90%.
Yeah, wow.
What we grow into our wine brand.
Okay, wow, well done. That's growth.
It is growth. Yeah.
Just on that point. Okay, so and we're almost going to bring this full circle. We were saying we were going to continue at the outset the conversation about biodynamic, etc., and the role it plays in the market. Was it market forces that dictated your decision to, I guess, try and distinguish yourself from other wineries through that way? Or Melissa's shaking her head, so I think she sees where I'm going with this. Tell because I guess where that becomes relevant then is I mentioned it's almost this gravy train now. Lots of people holding themselves out, and so when you got people that dedicate themselves to a movement like you've done, corporate carrots, incentives to distinguish yourself and jump on very popular movements, almost too tempting.
Not at all.
Not sure explicitly of anybody that's doing that, but the temptation must be there. So how do people like yourselves feel about that whole theme?
Oh, look, I mean, I'm not here to make judgment on what anybody else does, but that wasn't what drew us to this way of farming in the beginning. So it came from a personal belief, and I went to a health retreat actually. So I suffer from migraines, and I went to this retreat, and it was a very life-changing experience for me, where I learned about the impact of chemicals on our environment, on our own personal, health. And I just came back from that, and I just became a real advocate for organic.
Yeah.
And so I eliminated as much toxins as I could from my own environment, and started growing my own organic veggies at home. And then I was sort of looking at what was happening at work, and there was this real disconnect, because we were very high input, intensive conventional vineyard. Lots of herbicides, lots of pesticides, lots of fungicides. It was all happening here. And I went and spoke to Jock Bosworth at Battle of Bosworth, and because I wanted to know about what he was doing with organic. And so I started trialing one block of Petit Verdot organic. And then around that time, Mike went to a workshop in the Barossa, where he went to this sort of workshop on biodynamic wines, and he came back from that and said, the wines were amazing. Would you consider this method of farming? And I had actually come across it when I was at uni and done a field trip in WA and been to Cullen. And it had really piqued my interest, but I wasn't ready for it back then. And then when Mike brought it up again, years later and said biodynamic, and I thought, okay, now where I'm at, this is the right time. But it was a difficult decision because everybody thought biodynamics was a bit cuckoo back then. And also my dad, he just thought we were going to send him into financial ruin. He was like, well, how do you deal with, powdery, and what do you do about the weeds? And it does, he just thought we'd completely lost our marbles. So he let us trial. I said, okay, just give me a go, and so we trialed a block of Tempranillo, and it went fine. And I think fortunately Paxton vineyards were biodynamic. And we were able to say to Dad, well, David Paxton wouldn't be doing it if it didn't make any sense. And it kind of got us across the line, and off we went. Yeah. But it was, there was a bit of criticism towards me and a lot of negativity about people saying, well, it won't work on such a large scale. My dad was saying it's not going to work. Looking back, I was pretty naive and gung-ho about it all, but it was the best decision that we have ever made in terms of the progression of our vineyard and our fruit quality, and where we're headed today.
Okay, and I might throw this question at Mike. So bearing what you have just said in mind, Melissa, you go through the process, you cultivate the land, and this is from day dot when you've made this decision. The grapes turn out well, you're excited, you craft the wine. Hard sell. What's the reception like from that step forward? How do people receive that in the bottle?
So it took 10 years, Thomas, essentially, from what we transformed basically in 2007 for the wines to reflect what we were talking about. And so Josh and I work very closely in the winery, together, and have done for a long period of time. And I think, we were looking for that transformation. We could see bits of it, but I wasn't a true believer. We believed in it from the start, but we didn't see the transformation in the fruit quality and then the resulting wines till 17. And I think also sort of 15 and 16, we started to look at the way that we were handling the fruit. And if I sort of just get this really simple, that pumping and extraction and those sort of things weren't working for us. We were seeing wines with too much tannin, right? And so I think it was also grow up in the winery and let the fruit do more of the work and have more trust. But also at that time, it took a decade essentially for the fruit to really begin to express itself. And so then you change your the way that you want to be able to make the wine and craft the wine, in overseeing to nurturing, right? And that's a really big step, because most of the things we're trained to do as human beings is to intervene. All right, so this was a really good lesson essentially for us as I suppose we'll just call it makers of a product, but to have a lot of faith essentially in your raw material. Right, you talk to any restaurateur, you talk to any baker, any person who is making natural produce or produce and presenting it in a particular form. Get your hands out of it. All right, leave that original artifact material, hand grown, nurtured, soil dominated material, whatever it is you're doing, let it do its work. And I think we've come on a big journey. I think that it took a long time. I said 10 years. We're still improving, but where we saw that real transformation was about a decade, right? And now our wine styles, I think, are starting to represent what we're talking about. And the fact that it's taken that long, do I care? No. I think it's awesome, because I probably would have been given basically how impatient we are as human beings, but I would have liked to have happened earlier. But the fact that it hasn't, it's a really good thing. And now we're looking at continuous improvement. So every time, essentially, we're looking at a parcel of fruit, we're critiquing it, which is really painful from a QA perspective for Melissa and Troy. But from my perspective, it's like, well, that's exactly what we have to do, because every time a customer tastes our wine, they're thinking to themselves, how does this drink? Where's this from? Most people don't even know still who we are, which is fine. But we've changed the way that we're growing grapes and making wine to be really relevant for today. And that doesn't mean that it's about drink it tomorrow or it's not going to last. It's now about flavor full wines that are savory, they're not sweet.
So interesting. And just carrying on that point, these characteristics that you're wanting to come through and express themselves as a result of you undertaking that process, sweet, savory. I loved what you said at the start of this conversation in terms of talk about the most authentic expression of terroir, where you're letting literally the land and the environment speak through that wine. What is the end goal? So when you craft that wine, what is it you're wanting to achieve? Is it a certain expression of authenticity that you're wanting it to have, or is it you're wanting the consumers to love it? Like, to your mind, what is the big win for that the process you've undertaken to be fully worth it?
So the goal, from my perspective, and I think we share this, but you can certainly ask the question to Melissa as well, is that first and foremost, the wine has to be absolutely fucking amazing. And
it just has to be approachable and drinkable.
No, it has to be fucking amazing.
Well,
not
all of our wines are fucking amazing.
They are.
They're approachable and drinkable.
All right. But with the effing amazing bit, then comes the authenticity and credibility and traceability with it. So we don't want to be known as just biodynamic producers.
Yeah. So, and that's what I want to jump on, because that's important. So because somebody may think, who's not so familiar with the process, they're biodynamic. They're these cultural crusaders who have latched onto this movement and compromised the quality of the wine. That's not necessarily so. You can have great biodynamic wines. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. Look, we are driven by we benchmark, we critique. Quality control is extreme. Right. And the disciplines that we have brought into our business through certification, continuing to make sure that our business is authentic and traceable, etc., has actually forced us from a QA perspective to be vigilant. So, I flip this on its head, Thomas. When I go to market, right, and I'm working with our national distributor, I'm working with our international, importers, etc. Organic and biodynamic, sustainable, regenerative, etc., is number 5. We make great McLaren Vale wine, right? That comes from a place that tastes of a variety that is made in a particular way that happens to be boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, can I say that that's our charter? because, when we're driving, so I'm now on Grenache, and that's driving us essentially to continuously improve, because we know it's a thing and we're late into the thing. But I did my apprenticeship at Darrenberg, right, after Randall, and I've seen some of the most extraordinary Grenache that Chester and Darry have ever made, right? And what a great place to do your apprenticeship, right? And see what is capable and what can happen with Grenache. But our style is not their style. Perfect. That's really good. But what we want to be doing is making great wine. And Melissa's right that not every wine we make is great.
No,
right?
But they're wines that people like to drink.
That's it.
They're approachable.
I
just think, we're making wines that people like to drink.
Yep.
Isn't that what the aim of what every wine producer is? Or unless they're trying to put some weird bent on whatever they're doing.
Yeah. And sorry, Thomas, to add to that, I think that's a really important point. Let's bring in here that you can be all the things that Melissa's talked about and still be affordable.
Yeah.
Not Domaine della Romney Conti. I wish it was, right? Because, that price is prohibitive. But we can actually take consumers on a journey and say, you know what, you can do this. And is that not critical to every single person right at this moment in time, that we're doing something, right, to improve, right, the land where we found it? Yes, we're farming, but you know what? We're not absolutely denigrating and degrading and basically tearing apart, right, the beautiful piece of dirt that we're actually custodians of. Someone else is going to take this over in better shape than what we found it. And I believe that's sustainable.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. The international community. So that'd be something that I'd like to touch on very briefly, because there are a few other things I want to run through, and you guys have been insanely generous with your time. Is the big...
We're loving it, Thomas. We're all here, mate.
How good is that? Good. Okay, let's not stop. How big is the movement internationally? So I'm relatively familiar with how it operates in Australia, especially more so after this wonderful conversation I've had with you. Is there an international network in this regard? North America, New World, Old World? Paint a bit of a picture there.
So you talked about, you asked a question before about market forces. So one of the reasons that we came back after a trip that Melissa and I did into Sweden, into the Nordics, and we were told by a very successful importer there that if you do not certify, you will never enter this market. All right. So he was exactly right. So that was a big enough motivation for the business essentially to say, right, we can scout, round the edges and talk the talk, but unless you actually then certify, right, don't even think about going international, because no one in that market will accept you unless you're authentic. And the only way to be authentic, we practice organic principles, but we're not certified. They won't bring you into the market. Right. So we knew at that point, was that fair?
That was years ago. Because when we first started, we thought, we don't need to be certified. Like, it's just, it's good that we're doing better things for our land. And we very quickly realised that in order to be authentic about what we were doing, we had to be certified.
Yeah. So coming back to your questions, I said market forces. So that drove us essentially around the traceability part, right, to be authentic. Then where we sit today is an opportunity that the only new markets essentially we're opening up is because we're organic and certified. That is it, full stop. No one is interested in it. Okay, so, right, no one is interested in Gemtree, right? Just because we're a business. The fact, or we make wine. The fact that we have a track record and we are sustainable around biodynamic, organic, etc., regenerative, that is why they're talking to us. So I can tell you right now, so since China has closed, the opportunity of US, UK, and like a weird one, Fiji, right? Can't wait to go there, by the way, has come up purely because we're certified and we've been playing in this field for a period of time.
Yeah. Okay. I guess on that point, what I'm interested to ask you is, are you familiar with how the movement is represented and reflected in a place like the US? So, for example, if you're trying to get into that market and you guys are, on the frontier of this, representing it in Australia, I know that the some of the licensing and labeling requirements over in the US are probably somewhat more flexible than our. No, not at all. Okay,
No, a lot stricter. So
educate me. Tell me more. Yeah.
So the US, your wines are only considered organic if they have no sulfur. So there are very few Australian organic wines in America. You can, I think you can put on the label that your grapes are certified organic, but if there's any sulfur in your wine, that's not organic. So they have a very different system to us. They also, their organic farming standard is a lot stricter than Australia. So we are USDA NOP certified, which gives us that certification in America, but prevents us from being able to use certain inputs here in Australia, which are allowable here in Australia under the organic regime. So it's a lot more prohibitive.
And can I just ask you on that point, because this is something I've had conversations with people in the past, and there's been some disagreements, and I'm just not aware of the answer. So the presence of sulfur is a natural byproduct of the winemaking process. How does that fit into that? And is it a natural byproduct of the?
Well, in some instances, Thomas, yes, it is. But so there's okay. So the first thing is that with the US, that potassium metabisulfite as PMS, you cannot use as an organic producer. Thank you, Melissa.
Preservative. Yeah.
Right. No. So sometimes we use PMS essentially in the vineyard as a protectant, essentially before it comes into the winery for spoilage or whatever. So that's a no. That's the first no.
Yeah.
This is absolutely correct in terms of, so sulfur, you cannot be organically certified as wine in the US if you use sulfur. However, you can send organically certified wine into the US if you can use the USDA NOP logo, right? If you put on your label made from organically grown grapes. Because it is made from organically grown grapes, because we're not using PMS, right? We're not using any additives essentially in the growing process. But in the winemaking process, we've used sulfur, right? So therefore, right, then we're not allowed to, in the USA, we're not allowed to call it organic wine. Okay? Now, so does that explain that part of the question or not?
Yeah, no, I think it does. Yep.
Right. So the regulation, so the issue, I don't want to get sort of too bogged down in this, but the issue that we have in this country at the moment is that we are not legislated, right, by government in this country around what an organic standard is. We have the national standard, right? We have the ACOS, right? You can certify to both, but it is not actually legislated by government. So as on the board of Australian Organic Limited, and through our CEO, Nikki Ford, right, we have worked very closely with the previous government to allow the organic community to bring in a regulation where there is a standard and there is a regulation about the use of the word organic, because at the moment, anyone can claim they are organic without being unlawful, which to us as an organic producer is quite upsetting, right? So remove the emotion out of it. What we have to do, first of all, as an industry, to allow then us to be recognised by international producers like the EU, the USA, Japan, New Zealand, Korea, right? We have to actually have legislation in this country about what is the definition of organic. And isn't it unbelievably naive, I think, as a country of our international standing, we do still not in 2022 have a regulation around that term of what the definition of organic is.
Right. And is that just because we're not there, we haven't pushed hard enough, it hasn't really come to the
it's just around government legislation. There's no act around it that, you know, says
it
constitutes.
Yeah. And that affects the opportunity. So talking about our international, our ability to internationally trade freely is a huge issue at the moment. It's not prohibitive, but it means that the cost essentially to businesses like ourselves, and this is not just wine, this is across beef, it's dairy, it's every industry, right? That we are now limited to who we can trade with, because every single country has a different regulation and we need to abide by that country's regulation. Therefore, there is another cost to get audited in to be that law of that country.
Right.
So we are in the backwater, right? But all I can say is that we are working on this as a board within Australian Organic Limited, right? It's all tabled. The discussions are well and truly down the pathway of where we need to be. We know what we need to do, right? But I think it's a big issue even within our country about the definition of what is organic. And when you get a movement like sustainable, regenerative, etc., and I think that's fantastic, because they're conversations, we're making consumers more aware about things that are better for you. But organic will get left in the backwater if we don't bring this to the table very quickly. And we're having conversations with the new government and, whatever, but we've got to move quickly because it is 2022 and the national standard is 30 years old.
Huh. Okay. That was absolutely fascinating. Let's talk about your wines. So the varietals, your McLaren Vale, synonymous with freaking awesome reds. What do you guys do? What are your flagships? What are your personal favorites? Eva, Melissa.
Favorite varieties? What are you making?
Okay, so we have sort of moved to, I guess, more alternative varieties. So, Thomas, I'm really concerned about climate change. That is, I think, to be in farming today and to not be addressing the issues of climate change is almost negligent, because it is such a big issue. Our climate is changing. There is absolutely nothing that we can do about the damage that has already been done. So until 2040, we are dealing with this problem because the damage has been done. It doesn't matter what we do from here to 2040, that will influence beyond 2040. but this damage has already been done. So our climate is getting warmer. It's changed. You know, there's all sorts of strange things going on, as you would have experienced in Queensland recently with floods, New South Wales floods, you know, bushfires. We're getting more frequent hailstorms in spring. There's all these sorts of things happening. So I'm looking at varieties that can tolerate heat really well. And I'm also thinking logistically, because we've had a lot of Shiraz on our vineyard, and you know, come an extreme weather event, if you've got 50-60% of your vineyard planted to Shiraz, how do you get all of that into the winery in a timely manner at an optimum picking time? Well, you can't. So I'm trying to spread our risk a bit. So we've planted, we've changed from Chardonnay to Fiano, which was a fantastic suggestion from Mike, regarding, you know, how that variety will tolerate, tolerates heat, drought, holds its acid really well. And it's just a beautiful, a lovely white wine to drink, you know, really well suited to our Mediterranean climate. We've got some Albarino. We've got Tempranillo that grows, you know, that tolerates heat really well. Grenache, Mataro, they're the later ripening ones that, I mean, here in McLaren Vale, it gets hot, it's warm, it's hot, they get ripe. I've got something up my sleeve that another white variety that I'd like to plant from Greece, you know. So it's, yeah, we do have Shiraz, we do have Cabernet, we've got a bit of Chardonnay still. We've got some Verdelho, but we don't make that, we sell that to other people. But that's Sauvignon is, we make some sparkling from that. So we still have a lot of Shiraz, and that is, Shiraz is a beautiful variety from McLaren Vale that has this amazing mid palate and length, and just, you know, really layered flavors. But we've got a whole host of other things around that as well.
55% of what we grow, Thomas.
Sorry, Mike.
55% of what we grow is Shiraz. But I think,
but we're changing that. So.
Yeah, we are. So to Melissa's point, I sort of the business, if you go back a generation, which is not a long time, essentially, if we look at, you know, Melissa really took over control essentially from her dad, probably, let's say, a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer. But in the last sort of, let's say, 10 years, the transformation and change in the vineyard architecture, number one, so the structure, and Melissa can talk more about that, but then the varietal composition has been monumental. So we had Pinot, Riesling, Semillon, Sauv Blanc, PV, Merlot. So there's 6 that we don't have anymore, right? So the planting of Grenache, Temp, Mataro, Fiano, Cab, you know,
Albarino,
but in the right pockets, essentially, of the vineyard, that the soil is right for it, going back from a high input, high tonnage, conventional farming methodology into low input, regenerative. I mean, the undervine essentially at the moment, essentially, this vineyard is it's a biodiverse epicenter essentially of things to grow, right? Melissa will define that with much more intellectual information than I can give you, but you know, we're constantly looking at that improvement of what are we growing where and why, what is the market looking for, and then, but also at the same time questioning essentially, so what is this region really, really good at? Now, we're not the first entrant into market with Fiano. We know that basically Mark Lloyd and Coriol, you know, they basically started this journey a long time ago. Olivers are in there. There's so many other people doing it, but we see it as a great opportunity essentially in the market at the moment, that it's a fantastic wine to drink and is really suited to this region. So why aren't we going to be part of that? Tempranillo was something that we were very embryonic with. We started that, planted in, one of the first people in 1999. We're going through a really interesting transition with that at the moment. Is it a great rosé product, right? Or is it a dry red, or is it something in between? I don't know yet. I think it can probably be all things to all people. Like Grenache can make great rosé, great GSM, or great, small batch, top end, absolutely off the chart. I think we're continually looking at what we grow, how we grow it, and also what the market is interested in. And we talk to our major partners about that. We're certainly not sitting here internally thinking we have all the answers. We will engage with all the people we sell wine to. And as a business of the scale that we are, we need to do that internationally and domestically.
Okay. You've really segued into what was going to be my next question. Now into the future. So what's happening at Gemtree? What are you pivoting to react to? What's your vision? You got short-term, long-term goals. We've really touched on a lot of this. You're diversifying your varietals. You've got massive things happening in terms of you pushing in the organic biodynamic sphere, a little bit closer to home, maybe. Some personal goals for both of you, Mike and Melissa. What's going on there?
Whoa!
Without getting too personal.
No more children, Thomas. I can tell you that right now. We're done on that front. Yeah.
So I think in the past few years I've been finding a voice, I guess. So I've always sort of sat in the background and not really wanted to put forward my views, and I've realised that number one, in terms of my views on protecting the environment and the way that we're farming, that what we're doing, we're leading by example, and it's important that I step up and talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that's become a real purpose for me, and also being a bit of a minority in my field, as a female in viticulture and in the wine industry. I've realised that I'm in a unique position to be a mentor to other women in the industry, and to encourage them to take on leadership positions and to believe in themselves and drive forward. So that's another thing that is really driving me in what I'm doing. And we've also at our tasting room we offer tours to people, teaching people about the biodynamic philosophy. And
tell me about this tour. I saw a post recently on your wonderfully colourful Instagram account where you were showcasing the tour. Yeah. What's the tour?
So that, look, it's just teaching people about biodynamics and what's it all about, because there's a lot of people think they might know what it's about, but they don't really. And so we delve a little bit deeply into it in a very interactive tour. It's outdoors in nature, it goes through our gardens, it shows people the preps, talks about what they are, what they do. We walk out into the vineyard, and it's only 45 minutes, but it's very educational, interesting, and fun. And so we're playing a role in teaching people about what we're doing for nature and what they can do as well. I think that our planet is in a bit of trouble, and we here at Gemtree, well, personally, I'm just trying to do my little bit to make it a little bit better, and to inspire others on, while I'm on my journey. So I feel like I'm in a very fortunate position to be able to do that. Okay. So our Being Biodynamic tour, it's learning about the philosophy. You finish up with a beautiful platter of regional produce and a glass of wine. with a great view. That's what it's all about.
Sounds pretty good to me. Okay. Unless Mike has any cheeky comments he wants to add at that point, I'm going to bring it to my 3 closing questions. So the first of which, okay, first of which, and actually this will be interesting given the context that you bring to these wine conversations. If you could be anywhere in the world making wine, where would you be, and what wines would you be crafting? And you can say you'd be in the McLaren Vale at Gemtree.
Wow. Oh, that's a Jesus. What a left fielder that is.
I've knocked him. He's speechless.
Yeah.
First time interview.
Okay, so I'm going to come back just quickly while I think about that and just talk about the future things. So I think there's 3 really important things that, so while Melissa was talking and when you asked the question, I'll come back to your question about where in the world, but so family is essentially, so for me, there's 3 really important things, right? So family is to allow them to feel that there's an opportunity. So this is the voice of the future question, right? So I'm coming back a bit. To feel confident, but not pressured that there's an opportunity. So that's one. Then within the business that we have today, this is about the future and the present is to give our team a feeling that they have an opportunity to improve themselves, that this is not our business, that this is their business. And they work in the business and they have a voice that is as important as ours, right? And they're really steering the ship, right? And it's a really interesting point, Thomas, where you get to in your life, and we're both 53, and you know, we're not retiring, we're not thinking to ourselves that okay, this is it, but you know, we want to really talk about sustainability. We want a group of people, essentially, including our kids, hopefully, that will take this on, right? But we'll see how that goes, right? And then in terms of sort of personally in the voice of the future, you know, Minister talked about mentorship. I think we've got a lot to give back, but you do that very respectfully. You're never going to force yourself on people and say, well, I've got something to offer. I think we had a lovely young lady up here this afternoon who been on a fantastic journey. She's an employee of Gemtree. She's leaving our business to go on to something fantastic for herself, but she wouldn't have got to that position had it not been for the mentorship that, well, her self-drive and commitment, but also the opportunity that Melissa gave her and has allowed her to build up the confidence in her ability to say, you know what, I can take this on. So that was the voice of the future bit. If I was making wine, where do I want to make wine in the world? So
give it plenty of time to think about it now, Mike.
Yeah, I have, yeah. And I'm a thinker and a talker, so sorry about that. But you know, the IP that you gather in a place. So we've done international vintages together. We've been to France, Italy, Spain, you know, not in the fanciest parts of the world. We've done some grunt work and whatever, but what you build in the IP around the place where what it is that you craft takes a long time. You know, could I walk into Burgundy, into a Grand Cru vineyard and make good wine? I would hope so. Is that my dream? No. so that draws me back to here because there's still so much unfinished business in this site, in this place, to continue something that Melissa and I basically decided to do when I received my university results in the year 2000. And we had an opportunity essentially to perhaps go to the hunter and chase something that was going to be amazing. And she said to me, but we've got this amazing opportunity at home, right? Why wouldn't we go and make something amazing out of that? I was like, you're so right. Wow. So let's do that. So I'm coming back here because I've got unfinished business.
How good. All right.
I love McLaren Vale. I would not want to live or work anywhere else. I just absolutely love living here. I think it's one of the best places in the world.
Here's to McLaren Vale, and the wines are freaking awesome. So you guys keep making them. We get to keep drinking them. Pretty good deal. Next question, a wine-related experience. So that can be a moment in your Gemtree journey, could be before that, don't know, where you sat back, you took a holistic look at everything and you thought, I'm doing something pretty special. For both of you, what was that moment?
You got yours. Off you go.
A wine moment. Well, it's not necessarily to do with Gemtree though, but
doesn't matter.
I think when we first started out, we thought that the Henschke, Prue and Stephen Henschke were pretty amazing, and we loved their wines. And we went to a masterclass, a 10-year masterclass at Hill of Grace. That was incredible, absolutely amazing. And the night before we had our first child, we went out for dinner and we had a bottle of 1983 Henschke Hill of Grace. And that's probably the most memorable wine moment I've had. And obviously amazing wine that, you know, we will always aspire to make wine that good. So that was my wine moment.
Gee, that's a pretty good moment. Mike?
Yeah. So, and interesting enough yeah, exactly. I'm not going to even try, but just to add to that he
was there.
Yeah, that young boy who was induced that next morning, right after that dinner, came to France with us 6 weeks after that and did his first vintage, and he is having his 21st birthday this Saturday night.
Happy birthday.
Exactly.
Pass it on. Make sure he gets that.
Okay, thanks, Thomas.
Yeah. So I think I don't even want to try and top that or compete with that, because, you know, I think, and that tasting was another moment essentially when we looked at each other and said, we've got to do this. And we have an opportunity, and not suggesting for us. I mean, Stephen and Prue in that tasting, rarely do you see a husband and wife who offer two sort of parallel but absolutely collaborative discussions about how they work with each other. And I don't know of any other business essentially in the world that has that. And we looked at each other at that tasting and went, right, well, let's just have a crack at that. And I'm not suggesting that it will happen in our lifetime. In fact, I know it won't. But you know what? I reckon in the future, there's a really great opportunity for one of the generations that come after us with this business to go back and say, thank goodness these two dug deep and said, let's keep this thing rolling.
Okay. Final question for you, Mike and Melissa. Advice that you would give to a young whippersnapper like myself, or the 21-year-old that you previously referred to. They may not be in the wine industry, but they're intrigued by it. They're very interested. and they want to take it for all it's worth, get the most out of it. What advice would you give that person?
Well, they have to be invested in it. Like, they have to be doing it because they love it. Because if you don't truly love what you're doing, you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to be the best at what you do either. I'm not saying that we're the best, but because we truly love the industry that we work in and our different roles, in certainly what I do, I'm very driven, and it gives me a purpose, and so that makes me happy. So as long as you're committed and you're happy and you want to be doing it, then yeah, just go for it and do your best. You don't have to be the best, but do your best.
Mm-hmm.
So question the norm. So why is it done this way, right? Find the most important person in the business, right, and chase them down, right, and be doggedly determined to be better.
Loved both answers. They were short, they were sweet, they were to the point. Hopefully I didn't cut you off there before you had more to say, but they were great. Loved both of them. Mike, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a very special conversation. The passion, the drive, the motivation that you give are just absolutely terrific. Honor and a privilege talking to you both tonight. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for seeking us out.
Absolute pleasure. Mike and Melissa of Gemtree Wines, they truly are a voice for the future. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Good night.